"Mom, Stephanie needs that money more than you do. You're going to die soon anyway." Those words came from my own son, Michael, talking about my $480,000 retirement fund that I'd spent 45 years building, penny by penny. His wife, Stephanie, sat beside him nodding, already planning how to spend money that wasn't theirs. That night, I made a phone call that would change everything. 6 months later, Michael was begging me to reconsider. But by then, I'd donated every cent to the Riverside Animal Shelter, and they'd named an entire wing after me. Now Stephanie pretends she never wanted my money. Michael acts like he was just looking out for me. But me? I've never been happier, and I've never felt more proud of where my life's work ended up. Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Have you ever had family members act entitled to money you worked decades to save? Share your story below. I turned 70 on a gray Thursday in November, and the only person who remembered was my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who brought over homemade soup and a small potted orchid. No call from Michael, no card, no acknowledgment that the woman who'd raised him single-handedly had reached another milestone. But that wasn't unusual anymore. Ever since Michael married Stephanie 4 years ago, I'd gradually become invisible in my own son's life. My name is Eleanor Hartwell, and I've lived in the small town of Millfield, Connecticut, my entire life. For 45 years, I worked as a registered nurse at Mercy General Hospital, a job that started as a necessity when I became a single mother at 25 and evolved into a calling that defined my entire adult life. Michael's father, David, had been killed in a factory accident when Michael was just 6 months old, leaving me with a mortgage, medical bills, and a baby who depended entirely on me. Those early years were brutal in ways that people who haven't lived them can't truly understand. I worked 12-hour shifts at the hospital, sometimes extending to 14 or 16 hours when we were understaffed, which was most of the time. Mercy General served the entire Millfield area, including 3 smaller towns, and we were chronically understaffed and under-resourced. But the job paid well enough to support us. And more importantly, it came with health insurance that covered Michael's medical needs. From the very beginning, I was obsessive about saving money. Not because I was naturally frugal, but because I was terrified. Terrified of what would happen if I got sick and couldn't work. Terrified of unexpected expenses that could wipe out our security. Terrified of failing my son the way his father's early death had failed us both. So I saved 20% of every paycheck, no matter how tight things got. No matter how much Michael needed new clothes for school. No matter how badly our old car needed repairs. No matter how tempting it was to take a vacation or buy something nice for the house. When Michael was 8 and needed his appendix removed, the medical bills that insurance didn't cover totaled $8,400. I worked double shifts for 3 months straight, picking up every overtime opportunity and extra assignment available to pay off that debt without touching our savings. When he wanted to play Little League but we couldn't afford the equipment and registration fees, I picked up weekend shifts in the emergency room for 2 months and bought him the best glove and cleats money could buy. Michael was a good student, and a sweet kid who seemed to understand, even at a young age, that money was something we had to be careful about. He never asked for expensive toys or complained when other kids had things he didn't. He helped with household chores without being asked, did his homework without supervision, and seemed genuinely grateful for the things I was able to provide. We had a small but comfortable life, and Michael appeared to appreciate the sacrifices I was making to give him opportunities I'd never had. Through his teenage years, when other parents were complaining about grocery bills and college costs, I'd already been setting aside money for Michael's education for over a decade. By the time he was a senior in high school, I had enough saved to cover 4 years at State University, tuition, room and board, textbooks, and even spending money, so he wouldn't have to work during the school year. I wanted him to focus on his studies and enjoy the college experience I'd never had the opportunity to pursue. Michael graduated from Millfield High as salutatorian, earned a partial academic scholarship to State University, and seemed genuinely excited about studying marketing and business administration. He called me every Sunday during his freshman year, sharing stories about his classes, his roommates, and his plans for the future. He seemed grateful for the opportunity I'd provided and motivated to make the most of it. During his sophomore year, Michael joined the business club and started talking about internships at advertising firms and marketing companies. He was developing into a confident, articulate young man with clear goals and the work ethic to achieve them. I was proud of him in a way that made all those years of exhaustion and sacrifice feel worthwhile. This was exactly what I'd hoped for. Michael getting opportunities and experiences that would open doors I'd never even known existed. He graduated with a 3.7 GPA and a degree in marketing, and within 2 months had landed a position at Davidson & Associates, a mid-sized advertising firm in downtown Millfield. Starting salary was $52,000 a year, which seemed like a fortune to both of us. Michael found a nice one-bedroom apartment in the Riverside district, bought a reliable used Honda Civic, and seemed to be building the kind of stable, comfortable life I'd always dreamed he'd have. For the first 3 years after college, Michael and I maintained the close relationship we'd always had. He visited every Sunday for dinner, called twice a week just to chat, and included me in most of the major decisions about his life. When he got promoted to account executive and his salary increased to $65,000, he took me out to dinner at the fanciest restaurant in Millfield to celebrate. When he decided to move to a larger apartment, he asked my opinion about neighborhoods and lease terms. I was genuinely happy during those years. Michael was successful and independent, but still valued our relationship. My own life was stable and comfortable. I'd been promoted to charge nurse, which came with a significant salary increase, and my savings account had grown to over $300,000. I was able to take my first real vacation in decades, a week-long trip to Florida that Michael helped me plan and insisted on paying for as a Mother's Day gift. Then, in the fall of his 4th year at Davidson & Associates, Michael met Stephanie Walsh. Stephanie was beautiful in the effortless way that some women just are. Tall and slender, with naturally blonde hair that always looked professionally styled, and a wardrobe that suggested either exceptional taste or an exceptional budget. She worked as what she called a lifestyle consultant, which seemed to involve posting photos on social media, organizing charity events for wealthy friends, and providing advice about fashion and home decorating to women who could afford to pay for such services. Michael was completely smitten from their first date. He called me the next morning, something he'd never done after meeting someone new, to tell me about this amazing woman he'd met at a charity fundraiser for the Millfield Arts Council. She was sophisticated, well-connected, interesting to talk to, and apparently interested in him despite having what he described as a much more glamorous life than mine. Their second date was dinner at Chez Laurent, the most expensive restaurant in Millfield. Their third date was a weekend trip to New York City to see a Broadway show. By their 1-month anniversary, Michael was talking about Stephanie with the kind of intensity usually reserved for religious conversions or terminal diagnoses. She was brilliant, cultured, ambitious, beautiful, and completely out of his league, which only seemed to make him more determined to prove himself worthy of her attention. When Michael brought Stephanie to Sunday dinner at my house for the first time, I tried hard to like her. She was polite, well-spoken, and clearly made Michael happy in a way I'd never seen before. But from the moment she walked into my small house on Elm Street, I felt like she was evaluating everything. The furniture, the decor, the food, even me, and finding it all slightly disappointing. "What a charming little house," she said, looking around my living room with the kind of smile people use when they're trying to be nice about something they find inadequate. "It's so authentic. You can really tell that real people live here." Real people. As opposed to what, I wondered? Fake people, rich people, people whose homes were professionally decorated rather than furnished with pieces accumulated over decades of careful budgeting? During dinner, Stephanie asked polite questions about my work at the hospital, my garden, and my hobbies, but she seemed more interested in scrolling through her phone than listening to my answers. When I served dessert, a chocolate cake I'd made from scratch using my mother's recipe, she took a small bite and commented that it was so wonderfully homemade, which somehow managed to sound like a compliment and an insult simultaneously. "Michael's told me so much about your humble beginnings," she said as I was serving coffee. "It's amazing how you managed to raise him all by yourself on a nurse's salary. You must be so proud of how far he's come." How far he's come. As if his success was despite me, rather than because of me. As if the foundation I'd built for him was something to be overcome rather than honored. As if my 45 years of hard work and sacrifice were just humble beginnings that Michael had fortunately moved beyond. I bit my tongue and smiled, telling myself that Stephanie was nervous about meeting Michael's mother and probably didn't mean to sound condescending. Young people sometimes spoke without thinking, and she was clearly trying to be complimentary, even if the execution was clumsy. But over the next few months, as Michael brought Stephanie to more family gatherings and holiday celebrations, the pattern continued. Everything about my life was quaint, authentic, so real, or wonderfully simple. My cooking was home-style. My furniture was vintage. My stories about working at the hospital were so inspiring, in the way that people find stories about overcoming poverty inspiring, touching but slightly embarrassing, and definitely something that belonged in the past. When they got engaged after dating for 10 months, I tried to be genuinely excited. Michael was happier than I'd ever seen him, and Stephanie seemed to bring out a confidence and sophistication in him that I hadn't known he possessed. If she made him happy, then I was happy for them, regardless of my personal reservations about her attitude toward me and my lifestyle. The engagement party was held at the Millfield Country Club, which I'd driven past thousands of times but never imagined I'd enter as a guest. Stephanie's parents, Robert and Diana Walsh, owned Walsh Luxury Automotive, a chain of high-end car dealerships throughout Connecticut, and they treated the engagement party like a business networking opportunity as much as a celebration. The guest list included doctors, lawyers, business owners, and other members of Millfield's professional elite, people I'd seen around town but had never socialized with. I felt profoundly out of place in my department store dress among their designer gowns and expensive jewelry, but I was there to celebrate my son's happiness. Michael seemed proud to introduce me to Stephanie's friends and family, though I noticed that when people asked about my work, he described me as recently retired from healthcare rather than a nurse, as if my actual profession was somehow embarrassing. During the party, I overheard Stephanie talking to her bridesmaids about their wedding plans. The venue would be the country club's main ballroom, with a reception for 200 guests, a 10-piece orchestra, flowers flown in from California, and a honeymoon in Tuscany. One of her friends asked how they could afford such an extravagant celebration on Michael's advertising salary. "Oh, Michael's mother has been very generous," Stephanie said with a laugh that didn't sound entirely grateful. "She's been saving money her whole life, apparently. It's actually kind of sweet, how focused she is on Michael's happiness. I think she'd give him anything he asked for." I contributed $15,000 toward their wedding costs, which represented nearly 5% of my total savings, but seemed like a reasonable investment in my son's happiness. Michael and Stephanie expressed appropriate gratitude, though Stephanie mentioned several times that her parents were contributing substantially more, as if my gift was appreciated but inadequate compared to the Walsh family's generosity. The wedding itself was a lavish affair that could have been featured in a bridal magazine. Stephanie looked absolutely stunning in a $4,000 dress. Michael was handsome and confident in his rented tuxedo, and the reception was elegant enough to impress even the most sophisticated guests. I was genuinely happy for them, despite feeling somewhat peripheral to the celebration. During the reception, I sat at a table with some of Michael's college friends and their wives, most of whom were pleasant and inclusive, but I couldn't help overhearing conversations at nearby tables about vacation homes, private schools, investment portfolios, and other topics that reminded me how different my financial situation was from most of the other guests. These people weren't just comfortable, they were wealthy in ways I'd never imagined being. After the wedding, Michael and Stephanie honeymooned in Tuscany for 2 weeks, staying at villas that cost more per night than I'd ever spent on an entire vacation. They posted photos on social media of wine tastings, cooking classes, guided tours of art museums, and romantic dinners at restaurants where a single meal probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I was happy that they were having such wonderful experiences, but I couldn't help wondering how they'd afforded such an extravagant trip. The answer became clear when they returned from their honeymoon, and Michael called to thank me again for my incredible generosity in helping with wedding expenses. Apparently, in addition to my $15,000 contribution, I'd somehow also helped with honeymoon costs, though I didn't remember writing any checks for travel expenses. "Mom, you know that money you've been saving in your account that doesn't earn much interest?" Michael said during our first post-honeymoon conversation. "Well, Stephanie and I were talking, and we realized that if you loaned us some of that money temporarily, we could invest it in some opportunities that would earn much better returns and then pay you back the principal plus a share of the profits." I was confused. "What kind of opportunities?" "Nothing risky," Michael assured me quickly. "Stephanie has some connections in real estate and business investments through her family. Safe stuff, but with much better returns than you're getting in savings accounts. We're talking about maybe borrowing $20,000 or $30,000 for 6 months, earning 10 or 15% returns, and then paying you back the original amount plus half the profits." It sounded reasonable in theory, and I wanted to help Michael and Stephanie get established financially. But something about the conversation felt off. The timing, coming immediately after an expensive honeymoon, and the vague references to connections and opportunities that were never clearly explained. "Let me think about it," I said, which seemed to disappoint Michael more than I'd expected. "Mom, these kinds of opportunities don't wait around forever," he said with a note of urgency that was new in our conversations. "Stephanie's contact says we need to commit within the next few days, or the deal goes to someone else." I ended up declining the investment opportunity, partly because I didn't understand it well enough to feel comfortable, and partly because something in Michael's tone reminded me uncomfortably of high-pressure sales tactics I'd encountered from financial scammers who occasionally targeted elderly hospital patients. Michael seemed disappointed, but not angry, and I assumed that would be the end of such requests. I was wrong. The real changes in our relationship started about 6 months after the wedding. Michael, who used to call me twice a week and visit every Sunday, suddenly became busy with work projects and social obligations that I wasn't included in. Our weekly dinners became monthly, then occasional, then rare. When I did see him, he seemed distracted, always checking his phone and cutting visits short because he and Stephanie had dinner plans or charity events or couples weekends with Stephanie's friends. Stephanie was working on transforming their lifestyle, and that transformation required money. Lots of money. They moved from Michael's modest 1-bedroom apartment to a luxury 2-bedroom condo in the newly developed Riverside Towers downtown. The rent was more than double what Michael had been paying, but Stephanie felt it was important for Michael's career advancement to live somewhere that reflected his professional ambitions. They traded Michael's reliable Honda Civic for matching BMW leases, a 3 Series for Michael and an X3 SUV for Stephanie. The monthly payments were more than I'd paid for my entire car, but Stephanie insisted that image was crucial in her consulting business and important for Michael's networking opportunities in advertising. Their social calendar filled with expensive restaurants, weekend trips to Boston and New York, charity galas that required new outfits for every occasion, and dinner parties where they served wine that cost more per bottle than I spent on groceries in a week. Michael seemed to genuinely enjoy this lifestyle, and Stephanie was clearly in her element, but I couldn't understand how they were affording it all on Michael's salary. The answer became clear during one of my increasingly rare visits to their new condo. I was helping Stephanie prepare dinner for a small dinner party, and I accidentally saw credit card statements spread across their kitchen counter. The balances were staggering: $18,000 on one card, $12,000 on another, $8,000 on a third. The high. Minimum monthly payments alone were more than I spent on all my monthly expenses combined. When I gently asked Michael about their debt situation during a private moment, he became defensive in a way that was completely unlike him. "Mom, everyone our age carries credit card debt," he said with an edge to his voice I'd never heard before. "It's just part of building credit and establishing yourself professionally. Stephanie understands this stuff better than you do. She has an MBA in finance, and she knows how to leverage debt strategically." Stephanie had never mentioned having an MBA, and I'd never seen evidence of her using any business education in her work as a lifestyle consultant. But Michael seemed completely convinced that their financial strategy was sophisticated and intentional rather than simply unsustainable. That's when the requests for loans started. The first call came on a Tuesday evening in March, about a year after their wedding. Michael sounded embarrassed but desperate, with the particular combination of shame and urgency that comes from real financial pressure. "Mom, I hate to ask this, but could you lend us $5,000? Stephanie's car needs major transmission work, and we're a little tight this month with the new condo fees and everything. I'll pay you back as soon as my quarterly bonus comes through in June." The transmission story was plausible. Stephanie's BMW was relatively new, but these things happened with any car. $5,000 was a significant amount for me, but not devastating, and Michael had never asked me for money since college. If my son needed help during a temporary financial crunch, then helping him was what you did. I transferred the money that same night, and Michael's gratitude was genuine and profuse. He promised to pay me back with interest as soon as his bonus arrived and assured me that this was a one-time emergency that wouldn't happen again. But Michael's quarterly bonus apparently didn't materialize, or it went to other expenses, because June came and went without any repayment or even mention of the loan. When I gently brought it up during a phone call in July, Michael sounded genuinely surprised that I expected immediate repayment. "Oh, Mom, you know I'm good for it," he said, with a casual confidence that suggested he'd forgotten we were talking about my money rather than his. "Things are just tight right now with summer vacation expenses and some unexpected costs. I'll get it back to you soon." Soon turned into 6 weeks, which turned into another request. "Mom, I'm really sorry to ask." "Again, but we're in another bind," Michael called one Thursday evening in September. "Stephanie's friend Cynthia is getting married in the Bahamas next month, and we already committed to being in the wedding before we realized how expensive the destination wedding costs would be. Could you spot us another $7,000? I promise. We'll figure out a payment plan for everything we owe you." $7,000 for a destination wedding seemed excessive, but Michael explained that Cynthia was one of Stephanie's most important clients, and that declining to attend would damage Stephanie's business relationships. The amount was larger than I was comfortable with, but Michael assured me it was a unique situation that wouldn't be repeated. I transferred the $7,000, bringing their total debt to me to $12,000. Still manageable from my perspective, but starting to feel more like financial support than temporary loans. The pattern continued with depressing predictability. $7,000 became $10,000 when their air conditioning system failed in December and needed to be completely replaced. $10,000 became $15,000 when Stephanie decided they needed to completely redecorate the condo to reflect their evolving aesthetic sensibilities. $15,000 became $22,000 when they needed to attend Michael's boss's wedding in California and couldn't afford to look cheap in front of his professional colleagues. Each request came with genuine apologies, detailed explanations of why the expense was necessary rather than frivolous, and promises of repayment that never materialized. Michael had stopped mentioning specific timelines for paying me back and started talking about getting caught up on their finances in vague, indefinite terms. Over 2.5 years, I'd loaned them almost $60,000. None of it had been repaid, And the requests kept coming with increasing frequency and decreasing embarrassment. Michael had stopped pretending these were temporary loans and started treating my savings account like a family resource he could access whenever their lifestyle exceeded their income. The worst part wasn't the money, though $60,000 represented more than 10% of my total life savings. The worst part was watching my relationship with Michael change from mutual respect and affection to something that felt more like a business transaction. He called me when he needed money, visited me when Stephanie wanted to make a good impression on someone, and included me in their social plans when they needed an extra person to fill out a dinner table. I was starting to feel less like Michael's mother and more like his personal ATM, but I kept giving because I loved my son and wanted him to be happy. I told myself that his happiness was worth more than money, that I was blessed to be in a position to help, that this was what family was for. I convinced myself that once Michael's career advanced and their income increased, they'd be able to repay me and our relationship would return to its previous warmth. I was wrong about everything. The conversation that changed my life forever happened on a cold Saturday afternoon in February. Michael called and asked if he could come over to discuss something important with you. His tone was different, not embarrassed or apologetic like the previous loan requests, but businesslike, almost formal, professional in the way that people sound when they're about to deliver a presentation they've rehearsed. He arrived with Stephanie, which surprised me because she rarely visited my house anymore, unless there was a specific reason. They sat on my old couch in my small living room, and Michael pulled out what looked like financial documents from a leather portfolio I'd never seen before. "Mom, we need to talk about your retirement planning," he said, spreading papers across my coffee table with the confidence of someone delivering a business proposal. "Stephanie and I have been talking to a financial advisor and we're concerned about your current financial situation." I was genuinely confused. My retirement situation was actually quite good, all things considered. I had my pension from 45 years at Mercy General Social Security benefits that would start in 2 years when I turned 72, and my personal savings account that had grown to $480,000 despite the recent loans to Michael and Stephanie. I owned my house outright, had minimal monthly expenses, and was living comfortably on my pension and part-time nursing income. "What kind of concerns?" I asked, genuinely puzzled by this sudden interest in my financial planning. Stephanie leaned forward with the kind of sympathetic expression people use when delivering bad news to someone they consider intellectually limited. "Eleanor, we love you so much, and we want to make sure you're properly taken care of as you get older. But the reality is, you're 70 years old, living alone in a house that's becoming too much for you to maintain properly. Your health isn't what it used to be, and frankly, managing that much money at your age is becoming a real liability." My health was actually fine. I'd had a minor cardiac episode 2 years earlier, stress-related according to my cardiologist, but I'd recovered completely and maintained my independence without any difficulty. I still worked part-time at the hospital, maintained my own house and garden, drove safely, and handled all my own financial affairs without assistance or confusion. As for managing money, I'd been successfully saving and investing for 45 years, growing my retirement account from nothing to nearly $500,000 through careful budgeting and conservative investment strategies. But Stephanie continued her presentation as if my competence was already established as questionable. "We think it would be best for everyone if you simplified your financial situation," Michael said, his voice taking on the confident tone he probably used in client presentations at the advertising firm. "Move somewhere smaller and more manageable. Maybe that nice assisted living community near the hospital where you'd have help with daily tasks. Let us handle the investment decisions and bill paying and financial planning. Take all that stress and responsibility off your shoulders so you can just enjoy your retirement." "Michael, I don't need assistance managing my finances," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice level despite the growing alarm I was feeling. "I've been handling money responsibly for 70 years, and I love my house. I'm not ready for assisted living." And I don't want someone else making financial decisions for me. But, Mom, Michael said, his voice rising slightly with the kind of impatience usually reserved for unreasonable children. You're sitting on almost $500,000 that's just earning minimal interest in basic savings accounts. That money should be working harder for you. Stephanie and I could invest that money properly, grow it significantly, make sure it's working for your benefit instead of just sitting there doing nothing. That's when I understood what this conversation was really about. They didn't want to manage my money for my benefit. They wanted access to my money for their benefit. The $60,000 they'd already borrowed was apparently just the beginning of their financial plans for my retirement savings. We're not asking you to give us the money, Stephanie said quickly, apparently reading the suspicion in my expression. We're talking about a smart financial partnership. You give us investment, authority over your retirement funds. We use our connections and financial expertise to grow your money properly, and everyone benefits. You get much better returns on your savings. We get some financial breathing room to really establish ourselves and build the kind of future that will allow us to take care of you as you get older. Financial breathing room? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I knew exactly what that phrase meant. Michael looked uncomfortable for the first time since they'd arrived, but Stephanie pressed forward with the confidence of someone who'd clearly rehearsed this entire presentation and anticipated my questions. Eleanor, you have to understand our position here. Michael is 32 years old, at the most crucial point in his career development. We're trying to buy a house, start a family, build the kind of stable, prosperous life that will allow us to provide for you when you need more care and support. But we're being held back by student loan debt and credit card obligations that are preventing us from qualifying for a good mortgage. Student loans? I asked. Michael, I paid for your entire college education. You graduated debt-free. Stephanie's student loans, Michael clarified quietly, not meeting my eyes. She has an MBA from Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management. Very expensive program, but it's a significant investment in our combined future earning potential. This was the first time I'd heard any mention of Stephanie having an MBA from Northwestern, one of the most prestigious business schools in the country. She'd never mentioned this credential during any of our previous conversations about her work or background, and I'd never seen evidence of her using advanced business education in her consulting work. But Michael seemed completely convinced that Stephanie's expensive education justified their current financial situation and their plans for my retirement money. The point is, Stephanie continued, we could use your retirement funds as collateral to consolidate our existing debts and qualify for a mortgage on a really excellent property in a good neighborhood. Real estate is the best possible investment. Right now, especially in this market, and we'd essentially be investing your money in a rapidly appreciating asset while solving our immediate cash flow problems. I stared at them both, trying to process what I was hearing. They wanted me to risk my entire retirement security so they could buy a more expensive house and pay off debts they'd accumulated funding a lifestyle they couldn't afford on Michael's salary. What if something goes wrong? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. What if the real estate market drops? Or you can't make the mortgage payments, or the investment doesn't work out the way you expect? What happens to my retirement? Savings, then? Michael and Stephanie exchanged a look that suggested they'd anticipated this question and had prepared a response that they considered both reasonable and reassuring. Mom, Michael said, his voice taking on the gentle, patient tone people use when explaining simple concepts to confused elderly relatives. You're 70 years old. Realistically, how much money do you actually need for the rest of your life? You've got your pension covering your basic expenses, and Social Security will start soon. The savings account is really just extra money sitting around earning almost nothing. And honestly, when you pass away eventually, that money would come to us anyway as your heirs, right? We're just asking to access it a little earlier, when it could actually make a meaningful difference in our lives and our ability to build a secure future for our family. The room went completely silent, except for the ticking of my grandmother's mantel clock, and the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. Michael, my son, the baby I'd raised alone, worked double shifts to support, put through college debt-free, helped financially whenever he asked, had just suggested that I should give them my life savings because I was going to die soon anyway, and they were entitled to inherit my money. I looked at this young man who used to call me every Sunday just to chat, who used to bring me flowers on Mother's Day and handmade cards on my birthday, who used to hug me goodbye after every visit and tell me he loved me. The man sitting on my couch was a stranger wearing my son's face, talking about my death as a financial opportunity rather than a loss. "Let me think about it," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. "Of course," Stephanie said brightly, gathering up their financial documents with the satisfied air of someone who considers a deal successfully closed. "Take all the time you need to process everything we've discussed. We're not going anywhere, and we want you to feel completely comfortable with whatever decision you make." But as they prepared to leave, Michael turned back with an expression I'd never seen before. Not angry, exactly, but something harder and more calculating. Something that reminded me of the expression I'd seen on the faces of patients' relatives, who were more interested in inheritance timelines than recovery prospects. "Mom, you know we love you, right?" he said, his voice carrying an undertone that didn't match his words. "But you need to understand that Stephanie and I are trying to build a real future here. We can't keep living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to get ahead while you're sitting on money that could completely change our lives. It's not fair to us, and honestly, it's not smart financial planning for you either." After they left, I sat in my quiet house and stared at the financial documents they'd forgotten on my coffee table. Mixed in with their debt consolidation plans and mortgage pre-approval letters was a life insurance brochure with my name written on it in Stephanie's handwriting. That night, I made a phone call that would change everything, but not in the way Michael and Stephanie expected. The phone number belonged to Dr. Sarah Morrison, and calling her at 11:45 p.m. on a Saturday night should have been impossible. Dr. Morrison was the kind of woman who had assistants to manage her schedule, who served on hospital boards and medical advisory committees, who made decisions that affected thousands of patients and hundreds of healthcare professionals every day. But 12 years ago, Dr. Sarah Morrison had given me her personal cell phone number and made me promise to call if I ever needed anything. Anything at all. I'd never called. Not once in 12 years. Dr. Morrison had been my supervisor during what should have been the final chapter of my nursing career. Back when I was 58 and counting down the years until I could retire with full pension benefits. It was 2011, and Mercy General Hospital was going through the most traumatic period in its 75-year history. Budget cuts, staff reductions, and administrative chaos had turned what was once a well-respected community hospital into a place where overworked nurses were expected to manage impossible patient loads while administrators focused more on profit margins than patient care. I'd been working at Mercy General for 33 years by then, long enough to remember when nursing was considered a profession rather than just a job, when hospitals were run by medical professionals rather than business executives, when patient care took priority over quarterly earnings reports. But the healthcare industry was changing rapidly, and not in ways that benefited either patients or the nurses who cared for them. The crisis that brought Dr. Morrison into my life started with what hospital administration euphemistically called efficiency improvements. In practical terms, this meant reducing nursing staff by 20% while maintaining the same patient census. Overnight, I went from managing 6 patients per shift to handling 9, sometimes 10 when other units were short-staffed. The pace was unsustainable, the stress was overwhelming, and the quality of patient care was suffering in ways that kept me awake at night. Nurses were quitting faster than they could be replaced, and those of us who remained were burning out at an alarming rate. I watched colleagues who'd been dedicated professionals for decades become cynical and exhausted, counting days until retirement or looking for jobs in other industries entirely. The administration's response was to hire temporary nurses at premium, rates rather than addressing the systemic problems that were driving away experienced staff. That's when Dr. Sarah Morrison arrived at Mercy General as the new chief medical officer, brought in specifically to address the crisis in patient care that was threatening the hospital's accreditation and reputation. Dr. Morrison was 45 years old, a Harvard Medical School graduate who'd built her career at prestigious teaching hospitals, before deciding to focus on healthcare administration and system reform. She had a reputation for being brilliant, demanding, and absolutely uncompromising when it came to patient safety and quality care. Dr. Morrison's first week at Mercy General was legendary among the nursing staff. She spent every shift walking the floors, observing patient care, talking to nurses about their concerns, and documenting the systematic problems that were compromising patient safety. She attended every department meeting, reviewed every policy and procedure, and asked questions that hospital administrators had apparently never considered. On her 7th day, Dr. Morrison called an all-hands meeting with every nurse, doctor, and department head in the hospital. The administration clearly expected her to announce new efficiency measures or cost-cutting initiatives. Instead, she delivered a presentation that demolished every excuse the hospital had been using to justify understaffing and overwork. "Patient care is not a cost center," she said, addressing a packed auditorium with the kind of authority that made everyone sit up and pay attention. "It's the core mission of this institution. Every decision we make should be evaluated based on one question: does this improve patient outcomes? If the answer is no, then we shouldn't be doing it, regardless of the short-term financial implications." Dr. Morrison announced that nursing staff levels would be immediately increased to meet national safety standards, that mandatory overtime would be eliminated except for genuine emergencies, and that patient assignments would be capped at levels that allowed for appropriate care. She also announced that the hospital would be implementing new quality metrics and that department heads would be evaluated based on patient satisfaction scores rather than just budget performance. The changes were dramatic and immediate. Within 2 weeks, Mercy General had hired 12 new nurses and was actively recruiting to fill additional positions. Patient loads dropped to manageable levels, mandatory overtime became rare, and the general atmosphere of crisis and desperation began to lift. Dr. Morrison had somehow convinced the hospital board that investing in nursing staff was not only ethically necessary but financially beneficial in terms of patient outcomes, liability reduction, and staff retention. But the most significant change, from my perspective, was Dr. Morrison's approach to recognizing and utilizing the experience and expertise of senior nursing staff. Rather than treating experienced nurses as expensive liabilities to be managed out, she began consulting with us about policy changes, seeking our input on patient care protocols, and involving us in training programs for new staff. 3 months. After Dr. Morrison's arrival, she asked me to serve as the lead nurse for a new patient advocacy program she was developing. The position involved working directly with families during medical crises, coordinating care between departments, and ensuring that patients' voices were heard in treatment decisions. It was more responsibility than I'd ever been offered, with a significant salary increase and the opportunity to use my decades of experience in ways that could genuinely improve patient outcomes. "Eleanor, you've been providing exceptional patient care for over 3 decades. Dr. Morrison said during our meeting in her office. "You understand this hospital. You know how to work with difficult families, and you have the clinical experience to spot problems before they become crises. I need someone I can trust to help me transform how we approach patient advocacy." The patient advocacy role was unlike anything I'd done before, but it turned out to be the most fulfilling work of my entire career. Instead of managing multiple patients simultaneously, I was able to focus on complex cases that required intensive family communication and care coordination. I worked with families during the most difficult moments of their lives, helping them navigate medical decisions, understand treatment options, and communicate effectively with medical teams. Dr. Morrison and I developed a close working relationship, That went beyond typical supervisor-employee dynamics. She valued my clinical experience and institutional knowledge, seeking my advice about policy changes and system improvements. I provided her with insights about how proposed changes would affect frontline nursing staff and patient care quality. Together, we developed protocols and procedures that improved patient outcomes while making nurses' jobs more manageable and sustainable. Over the 18 months I worked in patient advocacy, Dr. Morrison taught me skills that went far beyond medical care. She showed me how to analyze complex systems, how to identify root causes of problems rather than just treating symptoms, and how to present data and recommendations in ways that convinced administrators to support necessary changes. She involved me in budget planning, quality improvement initiatives, and strategic planning processes that I'd never had access to as a floor nurse. "Eleanor, you have natural instincts for systems thinking and problem solving," Dr. Morrison told me during one of our weekly meetings. "You see connections that other people miss, and you understand how to balance competing priorities without losing sight of what's most important. Those are executive-level skills that most people never develop." Dr. Morrison encouraged me to pursue additional education and professional development, offering to support my enrollment in healthcare administration courses and leadership training programs. She suggested that I consider extending my career beyond my planned retirement date, possibly moving into hospital administration or healthcare consulting. But Michael was in his final year of college, and I was looking forward to retirement and the opportunity to travel, volunteer, and enjoy some leisure time after 45 years of shift work. Dr. Morrison understood my decision completely, but she made it clear that she considered my departure a significant loss for both the hospital and the healthcare profession. "Eleanor, you're the kind of nurse who makes everyone around her better," she said during my farewell reception. "Patients feel safer when you're caring for them. Families trust you to advocate for their loved ones, and new nurses learn more in a month working with you than they learn in a year of formal training. That's not just clinical skill, that's wisdom and compassion that can't be taught." But the most meaningful conversation I had with Dr. Morrison happened on my last day of work, when she asked me to stop by her office before I left the hospital for the final time. She handed me an envelope containing a letter of recommendation that was far more generous than I'd expected, along with contact information for several healthcare organizations that might be interested in consulting work if I ever wanted to return to the profession part-time. "Eleanor, I want you to know that the work you've done here has made a lasting impact," she said, her voice carrying the kind of sincerity that made it clear she wasn't just offering polite farewell remarks. "The patient advocacy program you helped develop has become a model for other hospitals in our system. The training protocols you created are being used to educate new nurses throughout the region. You've influenced patient care in ways that will continue long after you're gone." She paused, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "There's something else I want to tell you, something that goes beyond your professional contributions. Watching you navigate your son's college years while maintaining your commitment to excellent patient care has been remarkable. The way you balanced personal sacrifice with professional responsibility, the way you supported Michael's education without compromising your own financial security, that takes wisdom and strength that most people never develop." I was surprised that Dr. Morrison knew about my personal situation, though I realized that during our 18 months of working closely together, I'd probably shared more about my life circumstances than I'd intended. "I've seen a lot of healthcare professionals struggle with family financial pressures," she continued. "I've watched good nurses make poor decisions because they felt pressured to help adult children who hadn't learned to manage money responsibly. I've seen people compromise their own retirement security to enable family members who mistook generosity for obligation." Dr. Morrison handed me her business card with her personal cell phone number handwritten on the back. "Eleanor, if you ever find yourself in a situation where your financial security or personal well-being is being threatened by family pressures, I want you to call me. Day or night, doesn't matter. I've learned things about protecting yourself and your assets that I wish someone had taught me when I was younger. You've given so much to your family and your profession. Don't let anyone take advantage of your generosity or make you feel guilty for protecting what you've earned. I thanked Dr. Morrison for her kindness and assured her that I couldn't imagine ever needing such help. Michael was graduating college debt-free thanks to my planning. He had good career prospects, and our relationship was built on mutual respect and affection. I was confident that my retirement years would be comfortable and that Michael would continue to be a source of pride and companionship. Dr. Morrison smiled, but her expression suggested she hoped I was right, while suspecting I might be naive. I hope you never need to make that call, Eleanor. But if you do, please don't hesitate. Some situations require resources and strategies that good people don't naturally know how to access. There's no shame in asking for help when you need it. Over the 12 years since my retirement, Dr. Morrison and I had maintained contact through holiday cards and occasional emails. She'd been promoted to Regional Chief Medical Officer, overseeing patient care at 15 hospitals throughout Connecticut and Massachusetts. Her Christmas cards included updates about her own life, marriage to a fellow physician, adoption of 2 children from foster care, completion of an MBA in healthcare administration, and always included a note asking about my retirement and Michael's progress. I'd updated her about Michael's graduation, his job at Davidson & Associates, his engagement and wedding, and his apparent success in building an independent adult life. Dr. Morrison's responses were always warm and congratulatory, though I noticed that she occasionally included subtle questions about my own financial security and whether I was taking proper care of yourself during these family transitions. Last Christmas, her card had included a more direct message. Eleanor, I hope you're protecting your retirement security and not allowing family pressures to compromise your own well-being. Adult children sometimes develop unrealistic expectations about parental support, especially when parents have been as generous and self-sacrificing as you've always been. Please remember that maintaining appropriate boundaries is not selfish. It's necessary for everyone's long-term well-being. At the time, I'd thought Dr. Morrison was being overly cautious. Michael's requests for financial help had seemed reasonable and temporary, and I'd been confident that our family relationship was strong enough to handle minor financial stresses without lasting damage. Now, sitting in my kitchen at nearly midnight with my cheek still stinging from the implications of Michael's words about my approaching death, I understood that Dr. Morrison had seen something I'd been too emotionally invested to recognize. She'd understood that my generosity and devotion to Michael's happiness might eventually be exploited by people who mistook love for weakness. My hands shook slightly as I dialed Dr. Morrison's personal number. The phone rang twice before her. Familiar voice answered, alert and concerned despite the late hour. Eleanor, is that you? Are you all right? The immediate recognition and genuine concern in her voice almost broke my composure entirely. Dr. Sarah Morrison, who probably received dozens of calls every day from hospital administrators, medical colleagues, and family members, had recognized my voice instantly, and her first thought was for my well-being. Hello, Sarah, I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm sorry to call so late, but you said to call if I ever needed help with family financial pressures. I think I need help. Of course. Tell me what's happened. Over the next 30 minutes, I told Dr. Morrison everything. Michael's marriage, to Stephanie, the escalating requests for money, the mounting debt and lifestyle inflation, and finally, today's conversation about my retirement savings. I described Michael's suggestion that I should give them access to my money because I was going to die soon anyway, and their apparent belief that my financial security was less important than their immediate wants. Dr. Morrison listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of sympathy or outrage, but mostly just letting me tell the story at my own pace. When I finished, there was a long pause before she spoke. Eleanor, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Do you believe that Michael and Stephanie will stop making these demands if you give them some portion of your retirement savings? Or do you think this is the beginning of a pattern that will continue until your financial security is completely compromised? The question forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding. Michael's attitude toward my money had changed fundamentally since his marriage. He'd gone from being grateful for occasional help to expecting regular financial support to demanding access to my life savings. Each concession I'd made had led to larger demands rather than reduced pressure. "I think they'll keep asking for more," I said quietly. "I think they see my savings as their money that I'm temporarily holding." "That's exactly what I think too," Dr. Morrison said, and I could hear the sound of papers rustling, as if she was already making notes. "Eleanor, you're dealing with financial elder abuse. It's often perpetrated by family members who convince themselves that they're entitled to access their parents' resources for their own benefit. The fact that Michael referenced your eventual death as a justification for immediate access to your money is a classic pattern. Financial elder abuse." The term hit me like a physical blow, though I recognized immediately that it accurately described what was happening to me. Michael wasn't asking for help during a temporary crisis. He was systematically attempting to gain control of my financial resources for his own benefit. "Sarah, what should I do? Michael is still my son, and I love him, but I can't give them my retirement money, and I don't think I can continue enabling this behavior. Eleanor, you need to understand that protecting yourself financially is not betraying your son. It's actually the most loving thing you can do, because enabling this kind of entitlement and exploitation isn't helping Michael become a responsible adult. It's enabling him to become someone who takes advantage of people who love him." Dr. Morrison paused, and I could hear her thinking through the implications of my situation. "I'm going to ask you another question, and this one is even more important. Do you want to just protect your money from further exploitation? Or do you want to teach Michael and Stephanie a lesson about the consequences of trying to manipulate and exploit someone who has spent her entire life caring for others?" The distinction caught me off guard. I'd been thinking about how to refuse their demands, but I hadn't considered the possibility of actually doing something that would demonstrate the cost of their behavior. What's the difference? Protecting your money means changing your will, setting up trusts, maybe moving your assets somewhere they can't access them. Teaching them a lesson means showing them what they've lost by treating you as a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be respected. I thought about Michael's expression when he'd told me that my money could change their lives, about Stephanie's confident assumption that I would eventually comply with their demands, about the life insurance brochure with my name on it. They had apparently already mentally spent my money and were treating my resistance as a temporary obstacle rather than a legitimate boundary. "I want them to understand what they've lost," I said, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. "I want them to realize that treating me like a bank account instead of a mother was the biggest mistake they've ever made." "Good," Dr. Morrison said, and I could hear satisfaction in her voice. "Eleanor, I'm going to help you do something that will protect your financial security and demonstrate to Michael and Stephanie that there are consequences for trying to exploit people who love them. But I need you to understand that this approach will permanently change your relationship with them." "It's already permanently changed," I said. "They changed it when they decided that my value as a person was less important than my value as a source of money." Dr. Morrison was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the tone of someone who was about to share information that would change everything. "Eleanor, there's something I need to tell you about my current position and resources. Being Regional Chief Medical Officer has given me access to networks and opportunities that go far beyond healthcare administration. I serve on the board of directors for several charitable organizations, including the Riverside Animal Shelter, which is currently planning the largest expansion project in its 50-year history. I was confused about the relevance of animal shelter expansion to my situation, but I trusted Dr. Morrison enough to let her explain. The Riverside Animal Shelter is preparing to launch a capital campaign to build a new facility that will double their capacity for rescuing and caring for abandoned animals. They're seeking major donors who want to make meaningful contributions to animal welfare in our community. The kind of donors who might be interested in making legacy gifts that would be recognized with naming opportunities. Understanding began to dawn. Sarah, are you suggesting that I donate my retirement money to the animal shelter? I'm suggesting that you consider making a planned gift that would accomplish several things simultaneously. First, it would ensure that your money goes to a cause that genuinely improves lives rather than enabling entitled behavior. Second, it would provide you with significant tax benefits that could actually improve your financial situation. Third, it would demonstrate to Michael and Stephanie that generosity is something you choose to do, not something they can demand from you. The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. Instead of giving my life savings to Michael and Stephanie to fund their unsustainable lifestyle, I could donate it to an organization that rescued animals and provided them with medical care, shelter, and loving homes. Instead of enabling financial irresponsibility, I could support genuine need and compassion. How would this work practically? I asked. There are several options, but the most strategic would be a charitable remainder trust that provides you with income for the rest of your life, while ensuring that the principal goes to the shelter after your death. You would actually receive more annual income than you're currently earning from savings accounts. You'd get immediate tax benefits, and you'd have the satisfaction of knowing that your money will ultimately serve a meaningful purpose. Dr. Morrison explained that charitable remainder trusts were commonly used by people who wanted to support charitable causes while maintaining financial security during their lifetimes. The trust would be managed by professionals. I would receive quarterly income payments that would likely exceed what I was earning from savings accounts, and I would have the security of knowing that Michael and Stephanie could never access or pressure me about the money. But here's the most important part, Eleanor. You don't have to wait until you die for the shelter to benefit from your generosity. You could make an immediate gift that would allow them to name a significant portion of their new facility in Your Honor, the Eleanor Hartwell Memorial Wing, for instance, or the Eleanor Hartwell Veterinary Care Center. The idea of having a building named after me was overwhelming, but the thought of being remembered for helping animals rather than enabling ungrateful family members was deeply appealing. There's another aspect of this that I think you'll appreciate, Dr. Morrison continued. The shelter's board of directors includes several prominent members of Millfield's business and social community. People who know Michael and Stephanie, people who attend the same charity events and social gatherings. When the new facility opens and your contribution is recognized, it will be very public knowledge that you chose to donate your money to help animals rather than support your son's lifestyle demands. I hadn't considered the social implications, but Dr. Morrison was right. Michael and Stephanie moved in circles where charitable giving was both socially expected and publicly recognized. Their friends and professional colleagues would know that I'd chosen to donate nearly $500,000 to animal welfare while Michael and Stephanie struggled with debt and lifestyle maintenance. Sarah, this sounds too good to be true. What's the catch? The only catch is that you have to be absolutely certain about your decision, because once you establish the charitable trust, Michael and Stephanie won't be able to pressure you about the money anymore. It will be legally committed to the shelter, and you'll have no ability to change your mind if Michael apologizes or promises to behave differently. That wasn't a catch. It was a feature. The biggest weakness in my relationship with Michael had been my inability to maintain boundaries. When he applied emotional pressure, knowing that the money was legally protected from his manipulation would actually be liberating. There's one more thing, Eleanor. I serve on the shelter's board of directors, which means I can facilitate this process and ensure that your contribution receives the recognition it deserves. But it also means that I'll be personally involved in making sure that your story, the story of a generous woman who chose to help animals instead of enabling entitled family members, becomes well known in our community. Are you saying that people will know why I chose to donate to the shelter instead of giving the money to Michael? I'm saying that people will draw their own conclusions when they learn that a devoted mother and retired nurse chose to give nearly $500,000 to help abandoned animals, while her son and daughter-in-law struggled with debt from trying to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't afford. The implications were staggering. Michael and Stephanie would not only lose access to my money, they would face social consequences for their behavior. Their friends and colleagues would understand that they had tried to exploit a 70-year-old woman who chose to help animals rather than enable their financial irresponsibility. Sarah, how quickly could this be arranged? I can have the preliminary paperwork prepared within a week, and we could finalize everything within a month. The shelter could announce your commitment immediately, which means Michael and Stephanie would learn about your decision through community channels rather than private family conversation. The thought of Michael and Stephanie discovering my donation through a newspaper announcement or social media post rather than a family discussion was both terrifying and satisfying. They would understand immediately that their demands had backfired spectacularly. Eleanor, I want you to sleep on this decision. Don't commit to anything tonight while you're emotionally processing what happened this afternoon. But I also want you to understand that you have options beyond just saying no to their demands. You have the power to turn this situation into something positive that reflects your values rather than their entitlement. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen until dawn, thinking about the choice Dr. Morrison had presented. I could spend the remaining years of my life as a victim of Michael and Stephanie's financial manipulation, gradually depleting my savings to fund their unsustainable lifestyle until I had nothing left to give. Or I could take control of my own narrative, ensuring that my life's work would be remembered for helping vulnerable animals rather than enabling ungrateful family members. By the time the sun came up, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Michael wanted my money because he thought I was going to die soon anyway and he was entitled to inherit it. I was going to show him that generosity is something you choose to do, not something people can demand from you. And I was going to make sure that when I did eventually die, I would be remembered for helping creatures who couldn't help themselves, rather than for being exploited by people who should have protected me. Dr. Morrison had given me something Michael and Stephanie would never see coming: the power to turn their greed into my legacy. The transformation was about to begin, and it would be far more dramatic than anything they could have imagined. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp March air that made everything feel possible. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror at 6:30 a.m., choosing my outfit for what would be the most important day of my 70 years. Gone was the defeated grandmother who'd sat in her kitchen Saturday night, processing her son's casual cruelty. The woman looking back at me had purpose, determination, and a plan that would change everything. Dr. Morrison had called Sunday evening to confirm our 10 a.m. meeting and to let me know she'd already contacted the shelter's executive director and the law firm that handled their major gift planning. Eleanor, I want you to know that everyone involved in this process understands the sensitivity of your situation. You'll be working with professionals who specialize in protecting donors from family pressure while ensuring their charitable intentions are properly executed. The drive to Dr. Morrison's office at Regional Medical Center took me through downtown Millfield, past the shops and restaurants where Michael and Stephanie liked to spend money they didn't have. Past the BMW dealership where they'd leased matching cars, past the upscale furniture store where they'd bought items for their condo on credit, past the jewelry store where Michael had probably financed Stephanie's engagement ring and wedding bands. As I drove, I found myself seeing my hometown through different eyes. These weren't just familiar streets and businesses. They were the social and economic landscape where Michael and Stephanie would have to live with the consequences of their choices. In a town the size of Millfield, news traveled fast, especially news about charitable giving and family drama. Within weeks of my donation being announced, everyone would know that Eleanor Hartwell had chosen to help animals, rather than enable her son's financial irresponsibility. Dr. Morrison's office was located in the executive wing of Regional Medical Center, a gleaming complex that served as headquarters for the largest healthcare system in central Connecticut. Her assistant, Maria Santos, greeted me with the kind of professional warmth that suggested Dr. Morrison had briefed her about the importance of this meeting. "Mrs. Hartwell, Dr. Morrison is waiting for you, along with Ms. Rebecca Chen from the Riverside Animal Shelter and Mr. David Goldman from Goldman & Associates, who handles estate planning for the shelter's major donors." The conference room overlooked the medical center's healing garden, where patients and families often sat during difficult times, finding comfort in the peaceful surroundings. It seemed appropriate that I would be planning my own healing here, creating a legacy that would help other vulnerable creatures while protecting myself from further exploitation. Dr. Morrison made introductions with the efficiency of someone accustomed to managing complex meetings involving multiple stakeholders. Rebecca Chen was the shelter's executive director, a woman in her early 40s who'd built Riverside into one of the most respected animal welfare organizations in the state. David Goldman was a partner at one of Connecticut's most prestigious law firms, specializing in estate planning and charitable giving for high-net-worth individuals. "Mrs. Hartwell," Rebecca began, her voice carrying genuine warmth and enthusiasm, "Dr. Morrison has told me about your interest in supporting our capital campaign, and I have to say we're thrilled by the possibility of working with you. Your nursing background and commitment to caring for vulnerable populations makes you exactly the kind of donor whose values align with our mission." Rebecca spread architectural plans across the conference table, showing detailed drawings of the shelter's proposed new facility. The current building, constructed in the 1970s, could house approximately 50 animals and was desperately overcrowded. The new facility would accommodate over 120 animals, with separate wings for dogs, cats, small animals, and medical care, plus administrative offices, volunteer training rooms, and public education spaces. "The total cost of construction is $2.8 million, Rebecca explained, pointing to different sections of the blueprints. "We've raised about $1.6 million so far through grants, corporate donations, and smaller individual gifts. We need another $1.2 million to break ground. And we're hoping to identify major donors who want to make transformational gifts in exchange for naming opportunities." She showed me a list of potential naming opportunities, ranging from $25,000 for individual kennel suites to $500,000 for entire wings of the facility. The main veterinary care center, which would include surgical suites, recovery areas, and specialized medical equipment, could be named for a donation of $300,000. However, Rebecca continued, glancing at Dr. Morrison, "we're also open to creating custom naming opportunities for donors whose contributions significantly advance our mission. A gift of the magnitude Dr. Morrison mentioned could justify naming the entire facility's medical wing and establishing an endowment for ongoing veterinary care." David Goldman leaned forward, opening a leather portfolio filled with legal documents. "Mrs. Hartwell, before we discuss specific gift amounts or naming opportunities, I want to explain the legal mechanisms that would protect your interests while maximizing the benefit to both you and the shelter." Over the next hour, David walked me through the details of charitable remainder trusts, using language that was professional but accessible. The basic concept was straightforward. I would transfer my retirement savings to a trust managed by professionals. The trust would pay me quarterly income for the rest of my life, and when I died, the remaining principal would go to the shelter. "The immediate benefits to you are significant," David explained, showing me projected income calculations. "Your current savings of $480,000 is earning approximately 1.5% annually in savings accounts, which provides about $7,200 per year in income. A charitable remainder trust would be invested in a diversified portfolio designed to generate approximately 5% annually, which would provide $24,000 per year in income." The numbers were staggering. I would actually increase my annual income by more than $16,000, while ensuring that my money would ultimately help animals rather than enable Michael and Stephanie's financial irresponsibility. "Additionally," David continued, "you'll receive an immediate tax deduction of approximately $180,000, which could be used over several years to reduce your tax burden significantly. The combination of increased income and reduced taxes could improve your financial situation by $25,000 to $30,000 annually. Dr. Morrison had been right. This arrangement would actually make me financially better off while protecting my money from family manipulation. I would have more income, lower taxes, and the security of knowing that Michael and Stephanie could never pressure me about my savings again. There's one more advantage that's particularly relevant to your situation, David said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. Once the trust is established, you have no legal authority to change the beneficiary or access the principal. This means that even if family members apply emotional pressure or attempt to manipulate you, you can honestly tell them that the money is no longer under your control. That was perhaps the most valuable aspect of the entire arrangement. Michael and Stephanie could beg, plead, threaten, or manipulate all they wanted, but I would be legally unable to give them access to money that no longer belonged to me. Rebecca pulled out a folder of photographs showing the shelter's current operations: dogs and cats in overcrowded kennels, volunteers working in cramped spaces, medical procedures being performed in inadequate facilities. Mrs. Hartwell, I want you to understand the impact your gift would have. Right now, we have to turn away dozens of animals every month because we simply don't have space. We have to euthanize animals that could be saved if we had better medical facilities. We can't provide the kind of rehabilitation and training programs that would help more animals find permanent homes. She showed me before and after photos of animals the shelter had rescued and rehabilitated. A dog named Charlie, who'd been found with severe injuries and was now thriving in a loving home. A cat named Luna, who'd been abandoned with her litter of kittens and had been successfully treated for malnutrition and disease. Dozens of animals whose lives had been saved because the shelter had the resources to provide medical care and find appropriate adoptive families. Your gift would directly save lives, Rebecca said simply. Every day for decades to come, animals will be alive because of your generosity. The contrast was overwhelming. I could give my money to Michael and Stephanie, who would spend it on luxury cars, expensive vacations, and lifestyle upgrades they couldn't afford. Or I could give it to the shelter, where it would literally save the lives of abandoned and abused animals who had no other hope. I want to do this, I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. I want to establish the charitable trust and donate my retirement savings to the shelter. Dr. Morrison smiled with obvious satisfaction, but David Goldman looked concerned. Mrs. Hartwell, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I need to make sure you're making this decision for the right reasons. Charitable giving should be motivated by genuine desire to support a cause you care about, not by anger or frustration with family members. Mr. Goldman, I've been thinking about this for 36 hours, I said, looking directly at him. Yes, I'm angry about my son's behavior, but I'm not making this decision out of spite. I'm making it because I finally understand what my priorities should be. I'd rather help vulnerable animals than enable entitled adults. I'd rather be remembered for generosity than for being someone's financial victim. Rebecca leaned forward with obvious excitement. Mrs. Hartwell, if you're genuinely committed to this gift, I'd like to propose something special. Rather than just naming the veterinary wing after you, what if we named the entire new facility the Eleanor Hartwell Animal Care Center? Your gift would be the cornerstone contribution that makes the whole project possible. The Eleanor Hartwell Animal Care Center. My name on a building that would save thousands of animal lives over the coming decades. A legacy that would be remembered long after Michael and Stephanie's financial problems were forgotten. There's something else to consider, Dr. Morrison added. The shelter's capital campaign announcement is scheduled for next month, including a major fundraising gala where they'll recognize founding donors and reveal naming opportunities. If you're ready to commit, your gift could be announced as the lead contribution that put the campaign over the top. What kind of announcement? I asked. Rebecca pulled out a glossy brochure showing plans for the capital campaign launch event. We're hosting a gala dinner at the Millfield Country Club with about 300 attendees, including major donors, community leaders, business owners, and prominent families. The evening will include dinner, silent auction, and a presentation about the new facility. Major donors will be recognized during the program and will unveil renderings of the building showing naming opportunities. The Millfield Country Club, where Michael and Stephanie attended charity events, where Stephanie networked with potential clients, where they tried to maintain their image as successful young professionals. An announcement of my donation at the Country Club would ensure that everyone in their social circle learned about my charitable giving at the same time. The local newspaper always covers our major events, Rebecca continued, and we typically send press releases to regional media. When we announce significant gifts, a donation of this magnitude would likely generate coverage beyond just Millfield. I thought about Michael and Stephanie learning about my donation through a newspaper article or social media post. The shock of realizing that the money they'd demanded was now committed to helping animals. The embarrassment of having their friends and colleagues understand why I'd chosen animals over my own son. When would the announcement be made? I asked. If we can finalize the legal arrangements within the next 2 weeks, David said, we could announce your commitment at the gala on April 15th. That would give us time to update all the promotional materials and prepare appropriate recognition for your contribution. April 15th was exactly 6 weeks away. 6 weeks to complete the legal arrangements, establish the charitable trust, and prepare for the most public moment of my entire life. 6 weeks before Michael and Stephanie would learn that their financial demands had backfired in the most dramatic way possible. I want to proceed, I said, looking around the table at these 3 people who were helping me transform my worst day into something meaningful. I want to establish the charitable remainder, trust, donate my retirement savings, and have the announcement made at the gala. David Goldman opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder of legal documents. Mrs. Hartwell, I'll need several items from you to begin the process. Bank statements showing your current savings balances, contact information for your financial advisors, and details about any existing estate planning documents that might need to be updated. Over the next 2 hours, we worked through the practical details of establishing the trust and transferring my assets. David would coordinate with my bank to arrange the asset transfer. Rebecca would work with the shelter's architects to update building plans showing the Eleanor Hartwell Animal Care Center, and Dr. Morrison would handle communication with the shelter's board of directors about the significance of my gift. Mrs. Hartwell, David said as we prepared to conclude the meeting, I want to make sure you understand the finality of this decision. Once the trust is established and the assets are transferred, you cannot change your mind. Even if Michael apologizes or promises to change his behavior, you will not be able to access this money for any purpose other than your own income payments. That's exactly what I want, I said. I want the money to be legally protected from any future manipulation or pressure. Rebecca handed me a folder containing shelter newsletters, annual reports, and photographs of animals they'd rescued and rehabilitated. Mrs. Hartwell, I'd like you to take these home and read about our work. I want you to feel completely confident that your money will be used effectively to help animals and serve our community. As I prepared to leave, Dr. Morrison walked me to the elevator with an expression that mixed satisfaction and concern. Eleanor, are you absolutely certain about this decision? Once we announce your gift publicly, there will be no way to undo the family consequences. Sarah, my family changed when Michael and Stephanie decided that my value as a person was less important than my value as a source of money. I'm not destroying our relationship. I'm just refusing to participate in my own exploitation. Dr. Morrison nodded approvingly. Eleanor, I think you're about to discover that standing up for yourself feels much better than being taken advantage of. And I think Michael and Stephanie are about to learn that there are consequences for treating generous people as resources to be exploited. The drive home took me past Michael and Stephanie's condo building, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that probably cost more per month than many families' entire housing budgets. I wondered what they were doing today. probably working or shopping or planning their next expensive entertainment, completely unaware that their financial future had just changed permanently. They had demanded my retirement savings because they thought I was powerless to refuse them. They were about to learn that I was powerful enough to ensure that my money would help creatures who genuinely needed it, rather than enable adults who mistook wants for needs. That evening, I called Michael and left a voicemail asking if he and Stephanie could come over Thursday evening to discuss their financial proposal from the weekend. I kept my voice neutral and businesslike, giving no indication of what I'd decided or what I'd been planning. "I've been thinking about everything you discussed," I said into the phone, "and I'd like to share my decision with both of you in person. Thursday around 7 o'clock would work well for me." I spent the rest of the week reading through the shelter materials Rebecca had provided, learning about their programs for animal rescue, medical care, behavioral rehabilitation, and adoption services. The stories were heartbreaking and inspiring. Animals that had been abandoned, abused, or neglected, who were given second chances at life through the shelter's work. One story particularly moved me. A dog named Bella, who'd been found chained in a backyard, severely malnourished and suffering from untreated injuries. The shelter had spent thousands of dollars on medical care, months on behavioral rehabilitation, and eventually found her a loving home with a family who understood her special needs. Bella was now a therapy dog working with children who'd experienced trauma, helping them heal while she continued her own recovery. That was the kind of second chance my money could provide. Not for entitled adults who wanted to maintain unsustainable lifestyles, but for vulnerable creatures who deserved compassion and care. Wednesday afternoon, David Goldman called with an update on the legal arrangements. "Mrs. Hartwell, I've reviewed your financial documents and coordinated with your bank about the asset transfer process. Everything looks straightforward, and we should be able to complete the trust establishment by early next week." "What about the tax implications?" "Very favorable. The immediate tax deduction will save you approximately $45,000 in federal and state taxes over the next few years, and the increased annual income from the trust will more than offset any reduction in principal. From a purely financial perspective, this arrangement benefits you significantly." Thursday evening arrived with unseasonably warm weather that made my small house feel stuffy and cramped. I opened windows to let in fresh air and spent an hour cleaning and organizing, not because the house needed it, but because I needed something to occupy my hands while my mind processed what was about to happen. Michael and Stephanie arrived at exactly 7 o'clock, both dressed in business casual clothing that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. They looked confident and expectant, clearly anticipating that I would agree to some version of their proposal for accessing my retirement savings. "Mom, you look good," Michael said, giving me a perfunctory hug that felt more obligatory than affectionate. "You seem more relaxed than you were Saturday. I hope that means you've been able to think through our conversation rationally." Rationally. As if their demand for my life savings was the rational position, and my resistance was emotional confusion. Stephanie settled herself on my couch with the satisfied air of someone who considered the outcome already decided. "Eleanor, we really appreciate you taking time to consider our proposal. Michael and I have been looking at some really exciting investment opportunities, and we're confident that we can grow your money significantly while improving our own financial situation." "Before we discuss your proposal," I said, taking a seat across from them, "I want to make sure I understand exactly what you're asking of me." Michael leaned forward with the earnest expression he'd perfected for important conversations. "Mom, we're asking you to trust us with money that's just sitting in savings accounts earning almost nothing. We can invest that money in real estate and business opportunities that will benefit all of us. And if these investments don't work out, if the real estate market drops or your business opportunities fail, what happens to my retirement security then?" Michael and Stephanie exchanged a look that suggested they'd anticipated this question and had prepared an answer. Mom, that's why we're talking about this now. While you're healthy and able to enjoy life, instead of waiting until you're in a nursing home or dealing with health problems, Stephanie said, her voice taking on the patient tone people use when explaining obvious concepts to slow learners. You could spend the next 10 or 15 years worrying about money you'll probably never spend, or you could trust us to use that money to build something meaningful for the whole family. 15 years. They were planning my death timeline and using it to justify immediate access to my savings. What if I told you, I said carefully, that I've found a different way to make sure my money serves a meaningful purpose? Michael's expression shifted slightly, showing the first hint of concern. What kind of different way? What if I told you that I've decided to donate my retirement savings to charity? The silence that followed was profound and telling. Michael went pale, his mouth opening and closing without producing sound. Stephanie's confident expression collapsed into something approaching panic. Charity? Stephanie's voice was sharp with disbelief. Eleanor, you can't be serious. You're talking about giving away nearly $500,000 to strangers instead of helping your own family? Not strangers, I said calmly. Animals. Abandoned and abused animals who need medical care and loving homes? Michael found his voice, though it came out higher and more strained than usual. Mom, you can't give away your entire retirement savings. What if you need that money for medical care or nursing home costs? What if there's an emergency? The charity has arranged for me to receive more annual income from the donation than I currently earn from savings accounts. My financial situation will actually improve. Stephanie leaned forward, her voice taking on a desperate edge. Eleanor, this is obviously some kind of scam. Charities don't pay people more money than they donate. Someone is taking advantage of you. No, Stephanie. Someone tried to take advantage of me, but not the charity. The implications of my statement hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Michael and Stephanie were beginning to understand that their demands had not only been refused, but had prompted me to do exactly the opposite of what they wanted. Mom, Michael said, his voice carrying a note of pleading that was new in our conversations. Please don't make any hasty decisions about this. We can work out some arrangement that helps everyone. Maybe we don't need access to all your savings. Maybe we could just borrow a smaller amount? Michael, the arrangements have already been made. The legal documents have been signed, and the announcement will be made publicly in 3 weeks. Announcement? Stephanie's voice was barely above a whisper. The Riverside Animal Shelter will be announcing my donation at their Capital Campaign Gala. The new facility will be named the Eleanor Hartwell Animal Care Center in recognition of my contribution. Michael stood up abruptly, his face red with anger and disbelief. Mom, you can't do this. That money belongs to our family. You're destroying our future because you're angry about one conversation. Michael, that money belonged to me. And I've decided to use it to help creatures who actually need it, rather than enable adults who think they're entitled to money they didn't earn. Stephanie was crying now, though whether from genuine emotion or calculated manipulation was impossible to determine. Eleanor, please reconsider. We're trying to build a life together, and we need help getting established. You're the only family Michael has. Stephanie, you're both adults with college educations and professional careers. If you need help getting established financially, you might consider living within your means instead of demanding that other people fund your lifestyle choices. Michael paced across my small living room, his hands clenched into fists. This is insane. You're giving away a fortune to help animals while your own son struggles with debt and financial pressure. You're struggling with debt because you've chosen to live beyond your means. I'm not responsible for your financial choices, and I'm not obligated to rescue you from the consequences of those choices. The conversation continued for another hour, with Michael and Stephanie alternating between anger, pleading, and attempts at emotional manipulation. They accused me of being selfish, vindictive, and mentally incompetent. They suggested that I was being manipulated by the charity, that I didn't understand the legal implications of my decision, that I would regret my choice when I was older and needed medical care. But their arguments only confirmed that I'd made the right decision. They weren't concerned about my well-being or my financial security. They were angry that money they'd assumed would be theirs was now committed to helping animals instead. As they prepared to leave, Michael turned back with an expression that combined desperation and something that might have been genuine grief. "Mom, I know I said some things Saturday that hurt your feelings. I was stressed about money, and I didn't express myself well. But you're my mother, and I love you. Please don't let one bad conversation destroy our relationship." Michael, our relationship was damaged when you and Stephanie decided that my value as a person was less important than my value as a source of money. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just protecting myself from further exploitation. After they left, I sat in my quiet house and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete peace with my own decisions. For the first time since Michael's marriage. I wasn't wondering whether I should give him money, whether I was being generous enough, whether I was failing him as a mother by maintaining financial boundaries. The money was gone, legally committed to helping animals and completely protected from family pressure. Michael and Stephanie could be angry, disappointed, or hurt, but they could never again make me feel guilty for refusing to fund their lifestyle choices. In 3 weeks, everyone in Millfield would know that Eleanor Hartwell had chosen to help abandoned animals rather than enable entitled adults. The Eleanor Hartwell Animal Care Center would save thousands of lives over the coming decades, creating a legacy of compassion that would far outlast any family drama. Michael had wanted my money because he thought I was powerless to refuse him. He was about to learn that I was powerful enough to ensure that my life's work would be remembered for helping those who truly needed it. The transformation was accelerating, and there would be no going back. 3 weeks to the day after Michael told me I was going to die soon anyway, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my bedroom, adjusting the collar of a navy blue dress that cost more than I used to spend on clothes in 6 months. The woman looking back at me bore no resemblance to the defeated grandmother who'd been dismissed as irrelevant by her own family. This woman had chosen her own destiny, protected her life's work from exploitation, and was about to make the biggest announcement in Millfield's recent charitable history. The Millfield Herald had already delivered the morning edition to every doorstep in town. The front page featured a preview article about the Riverside Animal Shelter's Capital Campaign Gala, with a prominent mention that several major donors are expected to be recognized for transformational gifts that will make the new facility possible. The article didn't name specific donors, but anyone who read carefully would understand that tonight's event would include some surprising announcements. What the article didn't mention was that Eleanor Hartwell, retired nurse and devoted mother, was about to be revealed as the shelter's largest individual donor in its 50-year history. What it didn't mention was that the woman many people knew as Michael Morrison's generous mother had chosen to give nearly $500,000 to help abandoned animals rather than enable her son's financial irresponsibility. But Michael, Stephanie, and the entire Millfield community would learn all of that very soon. The past 3 weeks had been a whirlwind of legal arrangements, facility planning, and personal transformation. David Goldman had finalized the charitable remainder trust with impressive efficiency, working with my bank to transfer the funds and establish the investment portfolio that would provide my quarterly income payments. Chen had worked with the shelter's architects to update the building plans, adding elegant signage designating the Eleanor Hartwell Animal Care Center and the Eleanor Hartwell Memorial Veterinary Wing. More importantly, I'd spent those 3 weeks learning to see myself differently. Instead of viewing myself as Michael's mother who happened to have some savings, I was now Eleanor Hartwell, philanthropist and community leader, whose generosity would save thousands of animal lives over the coming decades. Instead of being grateful for whatever attention my family chose to give me, I was someone whose contributions to the community had earned genuine respect and appreciation. The transformation hadn't been entirely smooth. Michael had called me 6 times in the past 3 weeks, each conversation following the same pattern. Initial attempts at casual family conversation, followed by increasingly desperate efforts to convince me to reconsider my donation, ending with accusations that I was being manipulated or that I'd lost my mental competence. "Mom, I've been talking to some people about charitable remainder trusts," Michael said during his most recent call, "and they told me that these arrangements are often used to take advantage of elderly people. Are you sure you're not being scammed?" "Michael, I'm working with one of Connecticut's most respected law firms and a charity that's been serving our community for 50 years. The only people who tried to take advantage of me were you and Stephanie." "Mom, that's not fair. We weren't trying to take advantage of you. We were trying to help you make smart financial decisions." "Smart financial decisions? Michael, you wanted me to risk my entire retirement security so you could buy a more expensive house and pay off credit card debt you accumulated living beyond your means. How is that smart for me?" Stephanie had tried a different approach, stopping by my house unannounced twice in the past 3 weeks with what she claimed were peace offerings: expensive flowers, gourmet coffee, a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Each visit included carefully rehearsed apologies for misunderstanding my concerns, followed by suggestions that we could work together to find financial arrangements that helped everyone. "Eleanor, I think there might have been some miscommunication about what we were asking," Stephanie said during her most recent visit, sitting in my living room with the kind of forced smile people use when they're trying to sell something. "We weren't asking you to give us your money. We were suggesting a family investment partnership where everyone benefits." "Stephanie, you and Michael specifically told me that I should give you access to my retirement savings because I was going to die soon anyway, and you were entitled to inherit the money. There was no miscommunication. I think you might have misunderstood the context of that conversation. We were talking about estate planning and tax efficiency, not asking you to give up your financial security." "Stephanie, please stop. I'm not confused about what happened. I'm not being manipulated by the charity, and I'm not going to change my mind. The money is legally committed to the animal shelter, and that's final." But the most revealing conversation had happened 5 days ago, when Michael showed up at my house with printed documents he claimed proved that charitable remainder trusts were financial scams designed to separate elderly people from their money. "Mom, look at these articles," he said, spreading papers across my kitchen table. "They show that charities pressure old people into making donations they can't afford, promising income payments that never materialize. You're being taken advantage of, and I'm trying to protect you." I glanced at the documents and immediately recognized them as generic warnings about charity scams, not specific critiques of legitimate planned giving arrangements. Michael had apparently spent hours researching online, looking for anything that might support his argument that my decision was based on manipulation rather than informed choice. "Michael, these articles are about charity scams, not about established organizations like Riverside Animal Shelter or reputable law firms like Goldman and Associates." "Mom, you don't understand how sophisticated these scams can be. They use lawyers and professional presentations to make everything seem legitimate." "Michael, the only thing I don't understand is how my son became someone who would rather believe I'm being scammed than accept that I chose to help animals instead of enabling his poor financial decisions." That conversation had ended with Michael storming out of my house, shouting that I was destroying the family and that I would regret this decision when it's too late to change it. He'd slammed my front door hard enough to rattle the windows, leaving me sitting in my kitchen with the clear understanding that our relationship had fundamentally changed. But I wasn't sad about that change anymore. I was relieved. For the first time in 4 years, I wasn't wondering whether I should give Michael money, whether I was being generous enough. whether I was failing him as a mother by maintaining financial boundaries. The money was gone, legally committed to helping animals, and completely protected from family pressure. Michael and Stephanie could be angry, disappointed, or manipulative, but they could never again make me feel guilty for refusing to fund their lifestyle choices. The gala was being held in the Millfield Country Club's main ballroom, an elegant space that could accommodate 300 guests for dinner and presentations. I'd driven past the country club thousands of times over the years, but had only been inside twice. Once for Michael and Stephanie's engagement party, and once for a hospital fundraiser where I'd felt completely out of place among Millfield's social and professional elite. Tonight was different. Tonight I wasn't just a retired nurse attending an event where I didn't quite belong. I was the guest of honor, the major donor whose generosity had made the entire evening possible. Rebecca Chen had arranged for me to sit at the head table with the shelter's board of directors, prominent community leaders, and other major donors who'd committed significant funds to the capital campaign. Dr. Morrison met me in the country club lobby, looking elegant in a black evening dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension payment. "Eleanor, you look absolutely wonderful. Are you ready for your big evening?" "I think so. Nervous but ready." "Good. Nervous means you understand the significance of what you're doing. Eleanor, I want you to know that the shelter's board is thrilled about your gift, not just because of the financial impact, but because of what it represents. You're setting an example of how generosity should work. Thoughtful, strategic, and focused on genuine need rather than enabling problematic behavior. The cocktail reception preceding dinner gave me my first glimpse of how the community viewed my transformation. People I'd known casually for decades, fellow hospital employees, neighbors, members of my church, approached me with congratulations and expressions of admiration that felt completely genuine. "Eleanor, I had no idea you were such a devoted animal lover," said Janet Williams, who'd worked in the hospital's billing department for 20 years. "What you're doing for the shelter is absolutely wonderful." "Mrs. Hartwell, my daughter, volunteers at the shelter, and she says your donation is going to change everything," said Tom Bradley, who'd coached Michael's Little League team and whose family had always been friendly but not particularly close. "They'll be able to save so many more animals now." But the most meaningful conversations were with people who seemed to understand the deeper significance of my decision. Helen Rodriguez, who owned a successful catering business and served on the city council, pulled me aside during the reception with an expression that mixed admiration and something that might have been relief. "Eleanor, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I think what you're doing is incredibly brave," she said quietly. "I know it hasn't been easy dealing with family financial pressures, and I admire your decision to prioritize genuine need over family entitlement." Helen's comment suggested that word had already spread about the circumstances surrounding my donation. In a town the size of Millfield, family financial drama rarely remained completely private, especially when it involved amounts of money large enough to fund major charitable projects. "Thank you, Helen. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one." "Eleanor, you're setting an example that a lot of parents need to see. Too many good people get taken advantage of by adult children who never learn to live within their means. You're showing that generosity is something you choose to do, not something people can demand from you." As we moved into the ballroom for dinner, I scanned the crowd looking for Michael and Stephanie. Rebecca had mentioned that they were on the guest list. Stephanie's lifestyle consulting business occasionally worked with some of the families who supported the shelter, and they attended most of the major charity events in Millfield. I suspected they had no idea what tonight's program would include. I found them at a table near the back of the ballroom, both dressed in formal attire that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Michael looked tense and uncomfortable, constantly checking his phone and barely participating in conversation with the other guests at their table. Stephanie was making an obvious effort to network, introducing herself to people she didn't know and collecting business cards with the desperate enthusiasm of someone whose financial situation made every potential client crucial. They hadn't noticed me yet, which gave me a moment to observe them with the clarity that comes from emotional distance. They looked like an attractive young couple playing dress-up, trying to project success and sophistication they couldn't actually afford. Everything about them, the clothes, the jewelry, the confident postures, was carefully constructed to create an impression of prosperity that was built on credit cards and family manipulation rather than genuine achievement. Dinner was an elegant affair featuring locally sourced ingredients and wine that probably cost more per bottle than I'd ever spent on alcohol. I found myself genuinely enjoying the conversations at my table, which included discussions of animal welfare policy, community development strategies, and philanthropic approaches that had never been part of my social experience before. Eleanor, have you always been interested in animal welfare? Asked Dr. Patricia Morse, a veterinarian who served on the shelter's medical advisory committee. Not specifically, but I've always been drawn to helping vulnerable populations who can't advocate for themselves. 45 years of nursing taught me that the most meaningful work involves caring for those who have no other options. That's exactly the kind of perspective that makes someone a natural animal advocate, Dr. Morse replied. Animals in shelters are completely dependent on human compassion for their survival. Your background in healthcare makes you understand the value of providing care to those who need it most. The dinner program began with welcomes and introductions from the shelter's board president and executive director. Rebecca Chen provided an overview of the capital campaign, showing architectural renderings of the proposed new facility and explaining how the expanded capacity would allow them to rescue and rehabilitate more animals while providing better medical care and adoption services. Tonight, we're thrilled to announce that our capital campaign has reached a major milestone, Rebecca said, her voice carrying across the ballroom with obvious excitement. Thanks to the extraordinary generosity of several donors, we're now within reach of our fundraising goal, which means we can break ground on the new facility this summer. She clicked to a slide showing the campaign thermometer, which indicated that they'd raised $2.1 million of their $2.8 million goal. A murmur of appreciation rippled through the audience. This was more progress than most people had expected. We're particularly excited to recognize several donors whose transformational gifts have made this progress possible, Rebecca continued. These individuals and families have committed not just significant financial resources, but also their belief in our mission and their faith in our ability to expand our impact in the community. My heart started beating faster as I realized that my moment was approaching. Across the ballroom, I could see Michael and Stephanie paying attention to the program for the first time all evening, probably wondering if they knew any of the major donors who would be recognized. Our first major recognition tonight goes to someone whose commitment to caring for vulnerable populations spans an entire lifetime of service, Rebecca said, looking directly at me with a warm smile. Eleanor Hartwell spent 45 years as a registered nurse at Mercy General Hospital, providing compassionate care to thousands of patients and families during their most difficult moments. I heard a small gasp from the direction of Michael and Stephanie's table as they realized that the program was talking about me. Michael's face went white as he began to understand what was happening. Mrs. Hartwell has chosen to make the single largest individual donation in our shelter's 50-year history, Rebecca continued, her voice growing stronger as she shared details that would change everything. Through a charitable remainder trust, Mrs. Hartwell has committed $480,000 to support our capital campaign and establish an endowment for ongoing veterinary care. The ballroom erupted in applause that seemed to go on forever. People at nearby tables turned to look at me with expressions of amazement and admiration. I stood briefly to acknowledge the recognition, my legs shaking slightly, but my smile genuine and proud. But I kept my eyes on Michael and Stephanie's table, watching their reactions to the news that my entire retirement savings, The money they'd demanded access to just 3 weeks ago was now committed to helping animals instead of enabling their financial irresponsibility. Michael looked like he'd been physically struck. His mouth hung open in shock, and his face cycled through expressions of disbelief, anger, and something that might have been grief. Stephanie had gone completely pale, her carefully applied makeup suddenly looking garish against her white face. In recognition of Mrs. Hartwell's extraordinary generosity, Rebecca continued, clicking to a new slide showing architectural renderings, the new facility will be named the Eleanor Hartwell Animal Care Center, and the veterinary wing will be designated the Eleanor Hartwell Memorial Medical Center. The applause grew even louder as people realized the scope of my donation and the permanent recognition it would receive. My name would be on a building that would save thousands of animal lives over the coming decades. Children would learn about animal welfare in classrooms named after me. Veterinarians would perform life-saving surgeries in medical facilities that bore my name. Mrs. Hartwell, would you like to say a few words about what inspired your generous commitment? Rebecca asked, extending the microphone toward me. I hadn't expected to speak, but I stood up on slightly unsteady legs and accepted the microphone. Looking out at the audience of 300 people, including Michael and Stephanie, who were staring at me with expressions of shock and devastation, I felt a moment of perfect clarity about what I wanted to say. Thank you all for this recognition, though I have to say that I feel like I'm the one who should be grateful, I began, my voice stronger than I'd expected. For 45 years, I had the privilege of caring for people during their most vulnerable moments. Tonight, I'm honored to extend that same care to animals who have no voice, no advocates, and no options except the compassion of strangers. I paused, looking directly at Michael and Stephanie before continuing. I've learned that the most meaningful generosity comes from choosing to help those who genuinely need it, rather than enabling behavior that ultimately harms everyone involved. Animals in shelters are completely innocent victims of human failures, abandonment, abuse, neglect. They deserve our compassion and care without any conditions or expectations. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. I could see that some people understood the deeper message I was conveying about genuine need versus entitlement. When I was younger, I sometimes gave help when it was demanded, rather than when it was truly needed. I've learned that real love, sometimes, means saying no to requests that would harm the people making them. Tonight, I'm saying yes to helping creatures who have no other hope. I returned the microphone to Rebecca amid thunderous applause that seemed to go on forever. As I sat down, I felt Dr. Morrison's hand on my shoulder and heard her whisper, "Perfect. Absolutely perfect." The program continued with recognition of other donors and presentation of the timeline for construction, but I barely heard any of it. I was watching Michael and Stephanie, who were having what appeared to be an intense whispered argument at their table. Stephanie was gesticulating angrily while Michael sat in stunned silence, apparently still processing the magnitude of what had just happened. After the program concluded, I was surrounded by well-wishers congratulating me on my generosity and expressing admiration for my commitment to animal welfare. The conversations were warm and genuine, with many people sharing stories of animals they'd rescued or adopted from the shelter over the years. "Mrs. Hartwell, what you're doing will save so many lives," said Lisa Chen, Mrs. Chen's daughter who worked as a veterinarian in a neighboring town. "The new medical facilities will allow the shelter to treat conditions they currently have to euthanize animals for. Your gift will literally mean the difference between life and death for hundreds of animals every year." But the conversation I'd been anticipating finally happened as people began to leave and the ballroom started to empty. Michael and Stephanie approached my table with expressions that mixed desperation and fury. "Mom, we need to talk," Michael said, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "Privately." "Of course," I said, gathering my purse and following them to a quiet corner of the country club lobby. "What the hell have you done?" Stephanie hissed, apparently beyond caring about maintaining her social facade. You gave away nearly half a $1 million to help animals while your own son struggles with debt and financial pressure? Stephanie, Michael isn't struggling with debt because he lacks resources. He's struggling with debt because he's chosen to live beyond his means. There's a difference. Mom, you can't do this, Michael said, his voice cracking with emotion. That money was supposed to be my inheritance. You're destroying my future because you're angry about one conversation. Michael, that money was never your inheritance. It was my money, earned through 45 years of work, and I chose to use it to help creatures who actually need it, rather than enable adults who mistake wants for needs. Michael's face cycled through a series of expressions before settling on something that looked like genuine grief. Mom, I know I said some things that hurt your feelings, but I was stressed about money and I didn't mean them. You're my mother and I love you. Please don't let one bad conversation destroy our relationship. Michael, our relationship was damaged when you and Stephanie decided that my value as a person was less important than my value as a source of money. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just protecting myself from further exploitation. Stephanie stepped closer, her voice taking on a pleading tone that sounded completely false. Eleanor, please reconsider. There must be some way to reverse this decision. We're family, and families should help each other. Family should help each other, I agreed, but help should be mutual, respectful, and focused on genuine need rather than enabling poor decisions. What you and Michael were asking wasn't help. It was exploitation. Mom, you're not thinking clearly, Michael said, his voice rising enough that other people in the lobby turned to look at us. You've been manipulated by people who don't care about you personally. The charity doesn't love you. They just want your money. Michael, the charity wanted to help animals. You and Stephanie wanted to fund your lifestyle. The difference is that animals actually need help, while you need to learn to live within your means. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Michael and Stephanie alternating between anger, pleading, and attempts at emotional manipulation. They accused me of being vindictive, mentally incompetent, and selfish. They suggested that I was destroying family relationships out of spite, that I didn't understand the financial implications of my decision, that I would regret my choice when I was older and needed their support. But their arguments only confirmed that I'd made the right decision. They weren't concerned about my well-being or my values. They were angry that money they'd assumed would be theirs was now committed to helping animals instead. Mom, please, Michael said finally, his voice breaking completely. I'm your son. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Michael, you'll always be my son and I'll always love you. But being my son doesn't entitle you to my money, especially when you've made it clear that you see me as a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be respected. As they prepared to leave, Stephanie turned back with an expression that combined rage and something that might have been genuine desperation. Eleanor, you've made the biggest mistake of your life. You'll be alone and forgotten while your money goes to help animals that won't even remember your name. Stephanie, I'd rather be remembered for helping innocent creatures than for enabling entitled adults. And I won't be forgotten. My name will be on a building that saves lives for decades to come. After they left, I stood in the country club lobby for a few minutes, processing what had just happened. The confrontation had been painful but necessary, and it had confirmed that my relationship with Michael and Stephanie would never return to what it had been before their financial demands. But I wasn't sad about that anymore. I was relieved and surprisingly hopeful. Dr. Morrison found me in the lobby and walked me to my car, both of us quiet as we processed the evening's events. Eleanor, how do you feel? She asked as we reached my Honda Civic, which looked modest, but dignified among the BMWs and Mercedes in the country club parking lot. I feel proud, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. For the first time in years, I feel proud of my choices and confident about my priorities. Good. You should feel proud. What you did tonight was remarkable. Not just the financial gift, but the courage to prioritize genuine need over family manipulation. Dr. Morrison paused, looking at me with an expression that mixed satisfaction and something that might have been maternal pride. Eleanor, you've taught Michael and Stephanie something they desperately needed to learn. That love and respect can't be demanded, they have to be earned. And you've shown the entire community what real generosity looks like. The drive home took me through downtown Millfield, past the shops and restaurants where Michael and Stephanie liked to spend money they didn't have, past their condo building, where lights were on in what I assumed was their unit. I wondered what they were saying to each other, how they were processing the loss of money they'd already mentally spent, how they would explain to their friends and colleagues that Michael's mother had chosen to help animals rather than enable their financial irresponsibility. But mostly, I felt a deep sense of peace that I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since Michael's marriage, I wasn't wondering whether I should give him money, whether I was being generous enough, whether I was failing him as a mother by maintaining financial boundaries. The money was gone, legally committed to helping animals and completely protected from family pressure. Michael and Stephanie could be angry, disappointed, or hurt, but they could never again make me feel guilty for refusing to fund their lifestyle choices. More importantly, I'd discovered something about myself that I'd forgotten during years of making myself smaller to accommodate other people's comfort. I was Eleanor Hartwell, a woman who'd worked 45 years caring for others, who'd raised a son alone while building financial security through careful planning and disciplined saving, who'd chosen to use her life's work to help vulnerable creatures rather than enable entitled adults. The Eleanor Hartwell Animal Care Center would open next year, providing medical care and loving homes for thousands of animals over the coming decades. Children would learn about compassion in classrooms, named after me. Veterinarians would perform life-saving surgeries in facilities that bore my name. My legacy would be measured not by the ungrateful son I'd raised, but by the innocent lives I'd chosen to save. 6 months later, I attended the groundbreaking ceremony for the new facility, surrounded by community leaders, shelter volunteers, and families whose pets had been saved by the organization I'd chosen to support. The ceremony featured a bronze plaque with my name and a quote I'd chosen. "The measure of a life well lived is not what we accumulate, but what we give to those who need it most." Michael and Stephanie were not in attendance. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they'd moved to a smaller apartment to reduce their living expenses, that Stephanie's consulting business was struggling, and that Michael was working longer, hours to pay down the credit card debt they'd accumulated trying to maintain their unsustainable lifestyle. Some people probably felt sorry for them, but I felt proud that they were finally learning to live within their means. Dr. Morrison invited me to join the shelter's board of directors, where my healthcare background and patient advocacy experience proved valuable in developing policies for animal medical care and volunteer training. I discovered that I enjoyed committee work, strategic planning, and the opportunity to contribute to an organization whose mission aligned with my values. Most importantly, I learned that respect is not something you earn through service and sacrifice. It's something you require as a basic condition of relationships. Michael had demanded my money because he thought I was too weak to refuse him. He'd learned instead that I was strong enough to choose my own legacy and wise enough to invest in genuine need rather than entitled wants. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. Michael thought he was demanding money that was rightfully his. Instead, he taught me that my true value wasn't measured by what I could give to ungrateful family members, but by what I could contribute to creatures who genuinely needed help. If someone in your life is treating you like a bank account instead of a person, maybe it's time to show them what they're actually worth to you. Maybe it's time to stop enabling poor decisions and start investing in genuine need. Because generosity isn't something people can demand from you. It's something you choose to give to those who truly deserve it. And sometimes the only way to teach entitled people their place is to show them exactly where your priorities really lie. What's your story? share it in the comments below. And remember to like and subscribe for more stories about turning family manipulation into personal empowerment. You're never too old, never too late, never too powerless to choose your own legacy. Sometimes you just need the right motivation to begin. The Eleanor Hartwell Animal Care Center opened 18 months later, and it saved over 2,000 animal lives in its first 2 years of operation. My retirement income increased just as Dr. Morrison promised. My tax burden decreased significantly, and I've never once regretted choosing compassion over entitlement. Michael still lives in Millfield, but we rarely speak. Stephanie's consulting business failed, and I heard they divorced last year. Some people might call that sad, but I call it the natural consequence of building a relationship on financial exploitation rather than genuine love and respect. My legacy isn't the son I raised. It's the lives I chose to save when I was old. Enough to understand what really mattered. And that feels like the best investment I ever made. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.